I'm starting a brand new series today on beat 'em up style games. I've been getting a lot of requests about mechanics within beat 'em up style, so I'm going to dedicate a whole series on this. Look for the episodes in the future labeled beat 'em up style in Unity as we move along. Please like and subscribe and also hit the bell so you know when new episodes drop. Today's episode is all about setting up the sprites that we'll be using the rest of the time. Be sure to download the zip file in the description below so you can follow along. We're going to be talking about cleaning up the sprites and setting up their pivots for this style of game. Let's jump into it. So hopefully you've downloaded the zip file and unzipped it. It's sitting somewhere in your file structure. We're going to be looking at some of these files and then cleaning up and removing their backgrounds so that we can slice them up and use them in our game. I've harvested some floating around the internet. You could, if you're not happy with these sprites, you can go and find your own. I have a number of backgrounds taken from a series like Golden Axe or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, some classic beat 'em up style games, and we'll be using these throughout the series. Some characters that we'll be using is a buckler character, swashbuckler, with a sword and gun attack. Then we're using Gilius from Golden Axe, Metalhead, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. I've removed some of these backgrounds for you already, but a couple of these we might have to do ourselves. This is a Botsman from a pirate character that I created. And let's go to the Shredder. We don't need both of these Shredders. Let's get rid of one. So here's Shredder, and obviously has a green background. We don't want that. So on a Mac, I'll go to Preview and select this button, and then go to the magic wand, and then click in the area that I want to remove. It's going to highlight that color that I've selected. I'm still holding down the mouse, and I can drag down to tell it how much of that to remove. I'm happy with that selection. You can see the marching ants around the area that's going to cut away. I'm going to hit delete on my keyboard and hit save. I'm happy with that. Let's go to Skelly. If you follow along with my other series, then this is a character that you might be familiar with. We don't need to do anything here. It's all transparent. A couple more objects. We have a barrel, another barrel. All of these already have transparent backgrounds. And then rum bottle. Great. So we're happy with these sprites, and that'll be enough to get us started, especially with character animations moving around. That's probably the main difference in beat 'em up style games. And we have enough character sprites to do that. So we're going to create a new project. I'm in Unity Hub. If you're following along, then I want to select a new, the version of Unity that I'm going to be using. We're going to start with 2019 3.11. It's going to be a 2D game, and we're going to call this project beat 'em up style. And make sure that you select the place that you want to store this game. For me, somewhere that makes sense. I have a games folder. Great. Unity is going to do its thing. And the whole rest of the time today is we're going to import these sprites into our project window. And if we need to, we're going to slice them up. I'm going to set up a basic scene. One of the biggest things that we want to do today is when we slice up our character sprites is to set their pivots and center points so that they're at their feet. The way that I'm going to be setting up my beat 'em up style game is that since there is an illusion of depth in most beat 'em up style games, we want to establish the characters' groundedness with where they are planted by their feet. So let's make some space, and we're going to drag our images folder into the project window. There's many ways to do this, right? We can go to assets import, and then we can also drag this whole folder into the project window. I'll select these 4 items and pull them into here. one of the items that we didn't look at is I've included this sprite called guides, and this is going to help us think about the space within this beat 'em up style. Within beat 'em up style games, with your character moving up screen, if we call this down screen, that doesn't necessarily mean that they were flying more into the air, but they're just moving in this horizontal plane. It just appears like they're going up a little bit higher. And this creates depth within this style of game, which really makes a difference, especially within combat. A little bit of movement, but mostly in combat. So designing our hitbox system, we're going to be using this as our guide to understand who is going to be able to get hit and who doesn't. Cool. So let's just first pick a background that we want to import into this main sample scene. And let's see, why don't we do, let's do the pirate ship one. Let's do skull and crossbones. We want to select sprite mode. It's probably going to be multiple because there's multiple elements to it. And we're going to hit apply. And let's hit the Sprite Editor. It's going to bring up a new window. Let's make it a little bit bigger so we can zoom in a little bit. Okay, so we can see that there's multiple elements to it. It's a good reason why we set this to multiple. Let's go to slice, and let's just see what Unity thinks about this and hit slice. We can hit this rainbow color, tricolor, Neapolitan ice cream type of button, and it'll show us where just basically black and white takes away the color, shows us where it thinks the slices should be. And most of this is pretty good, and we'll say that that's acceptable, and we'll hit apply. Unity will then, since this is background, we don't need to worry about pivots at the moment. We'll hit the X button, and then we should be able to see the individual slices here. Some of these letters are not that big of a deal. We could eliminate those if we go back in the Sprite Editor. We won't worry about that right now. Let's go and drag the water into the scene, and this is going to be our main background. And depending on how we want to set this up, let's just pull this in here somewhere else. One big thing that I'm a big proponent of is deciding what the resolution of your game is going to be. We don't want our UI to be flying around, and this is going to help us set up the scene if we know what our resolution or aspect ratio is. I'm going to stick to 1920 by 1080 for this project. I suggest you do that too, but realize that if you want to change this, you can go to this drop down menu in the game window and either select one that's already there or create a new one and either change fixed resolution or aspect ratio. Aspect ratio gives you a set of dimensions that you can make bigger or smaller. Fixed resolution is that value set no matter what. And then you can give it a name if you want to. I'm happy with this 1920 by 1080, so I'll stick with that. From there, here's my background. And I know that I'm going to be laying out sprites today, so it's a good idea to start setting your sorting layers. And sorting layers are a thing for your sprite renderer. Sprite renderer is going to help render the sprite, obviously. And in the sorting layers is where the renderer decides what gets drawn on top of something else. And under this additional settings, you can see that there's a sorting layer menu. There's only one by default, and then we can start adding some. If we know that there's multiple layers here, we can hit this plus button in the sorting layers area, and we're going to set one to be something like background or BG. Second one is maybe something like level. Another one might be characters, or let's say enemies. Another one might be characters. Third one might be objects. We'll start with this for this series, and then we might make some alterations. From there, this is going to be a background, and this is going to be sitting behind everything. So we can go to our sorting layer and set this to be background. Next thing we're going to do is bring in our ship sprite, and this is going to be where our characters are going to be walking around. Ultimately, if I zoom out a little bit, this is going to be longer than what my camera is going to be able to see. because we want them to move along in this game. So we can place it first. We want to give it a lot of space so that our characters can walk around, and I'm using this as my main judge at the moment. Maybe this is the corner that we start at. And then I want to change my sorting layer to level. And that's where my characters are going to be walking on, the level area. And cool, so let's just set that there. Now let's try to import one or two of our characters. Let's go to our characters and let's slice up the buckler character. Select that sprite sheet, go to Sprite Editor. Oops, before I do that, I gotta change this to multiple, hit apply. This is sort of like a pixely art type of sprite, so one of the things I like to do is change the filter mode to point. And if it still seems blurry to you, then oftentimes I'll remove any compression that goes along with it. We have several different sprites in the sheet, and we can go to automatic and slice, but I forgot. Let's see what happens when we do that, right? We'll go to this and pull this away. This could be okay. One of the main things that we want to make sure that if we do this method, right, is we really want to set our pivot points. This character, if we look at it, doesn't ever jump. So where they are at their feet really makes a difference here, okay? And the shadow can stay on this character. You'll notice in different sprite that we use, we need to make note of whether there's a shadow on there or not. Cool, so we'll hit apply and it'll slice it up. Let's look back here and we can see on these slices that there's a blue ring. And this blue ring represents the pivot point of each sprite. We want to adjust this because we want to set our pivot point for beat 'em up style games at the foot of our character. So I'll go back to my slice and set the pivot to be bottom. If I hit bottom left, then it's going to be over here. If I hit bottom right, it's going to be over here. So if I go bottom here like this and then hit slice, let's look at this. Because these sprites are a little bit bigger than others, if we had cut them in a more set cell size way, then we could make sure that everything is in the middle. Otherwise, if we're happy with this method, then we need to come back and move this pivot point so that, oops, we need to change the pivot. We go custom and then adjust along the x-axis where we want it. And so as long as it aligns with the center, we can move through animations and also represent the bottom of our character at that pivot point. So coming back here, I'll go to custom and change this to something like that. If you want to be able to do this, then we can do it that way. Or let me show you a different way. We can go to grid by cell size. And I forgot what my settings were, but so let's try out 64 by 64. And you can see that it's sort of mismatched in sizes. I think it was, I did some really weird sizing. 64, I think it was 60 by 64 with a padding of something weird. 1010. 2020. I think we're getting close. Padding of 15. Does that look right? I don't think it does. 16. And then this sword here is too short. It wasn't 64 by 64, was it? (16 by 16) with an offset of 16. Now I don't remember. Let's go back to the regular then. Yeah. Let's do it like this. Let's adjust the pivot points custom. Slide these over at their feet. This will probably get us there quicker anyways. Custom pivot point. So it's all the way at the extreme for the Y. We just want to make sure that the foot is relatively right in the middle of our shadow. Great. We'll hit apply. We have our main character. We're going to drag in our buckler then and pull it from the sliced up areas, drag it into the scene. It's probably going to be this off size and behind our ship. So we go to we make sure that we select our buckler character and we'll change the sorting layer to characters. We should be able to see that appear there. I'm going to jump to my transform and make it bigger. That might be too big. Yeah. It's too big. Something like that. And let's say that we're pretty happy with that at the moment. And let's change this to be the name buckler. So this will represent at the moment what our buckler character is going to be. Let's go and select another one. Let's do the Ninja Turtle, Metalhead. And select that. And we're going to change this from sprite mode to multiple. Hit apply. I think this is also sort of pixely. So if you want to change this to point, hit apply, go back to Sprite Editor. And let's go to automatic again. Slice. Let's take away the color. And we want to also set all of the pivot points to custom. Want to make sure, think about down the spine of your character. So this one needs to be shifted over a little bit. Just a little bit here. Just so that when they're walking, it doesn't shift back and forth. And we might have to do some minuscule adjustments if we have to. Go back a little bit. Okay. And you'll see the importance play out on why we set the pivots down here. Because we're going to use where your character is grounded and relative to the Y position to decide whether or not another enemy or character gets hit based on where they are along the Y axis. Where did I set this? Here. Almost done. Two more. And great. We'll hit apply. Let's drag in the character, maybe this sprite, into the scene. Of course, it's a crazy size again. Let's change it to characters for this sorting layer. And let's pull it in like that. Maybe make them a little bit bigger. Where's our buckler? Great. Okay, they're in relative-ish positions. That's good. And you can imagine them moving around kind of like this. Cool. And let's just rename this one to Turtle. Last one we want to do is possibly Shredder. Let's do Shredder. select shredder, multiple, apply, sprite editor, slice, auto magic. Let's check the slices. Looks pretty good. These will probably bring down, because these are probably progressions of their fireball when it hits the ground, right? So we'll adjust those later. For shredder, they're at their feet. Let's make sure the pivot point is near their center of gravity. Even though they have their arms stretched out, we want to try to span somewhere between their feet. And keep in mind where their torsos are. That's pretty good. Move this one over. And we can always come back and adjust these if it seems kind of off. Cool. And let's drag in shredder. Which one are we going to use? Not one with the crazy arms. All of them are him crazy arms. Alright, fine. Drag in shredder here. Make them big. And make sure that we set the sorting layer to be enemies. There he is, the man himself. And let's flip the sprite so that shredder is looking to the left. We'll consider him to be an enemy at the start of this game. We'll treat him like that. Cool. Let's name him Shredder. And let's do one last one. Let's do Skelly. This is probably the easiest one. We'll go to Sprite Editor. Nope, not Sprite Editor yet. Multiple. Definitely point no filter. Sprite Editor here. And let's slice it up. Let's check out the slices and let's look at the... Let's quickly adjust these. Almost done with this. This process is kind of tedious, and ultimately it's nice if you have an artist that is also implementing these for you. Especially if you have an artist that is moving things around or making the artist art for you. They can give you consistent cell sizes, etc. We can go to select this knife and we can delete it. That slash, and let's just make this incorporate here. We want to put this all into one cell. I'm hitting Command Delete to remove that extra slice. Yes, this is kind of tedious, but you know, that's part of the game. We're almost finished. Delete. And the reason that it's finding this to be a different cell is because it's detached from the rest of the sprite. And so just the edge detection is thinking that it's a separate part. Great. Hit apply. And let's drag in the Skelly into the scene. Give it a sorting layer of enemy. And we will make it a little bit larger. And make it something like that so that in relation to the buckler, it's a little bit smaller. Great. And then let's flip the sprite so it's facing left. Cool. We are nearly finished for first episode. Let's rename this to be Skelly. And then we have our first couple characters for our beat 'em up style game. Let's change this to be the sea. And this is going to be boat. Save that. Excellent. Last thing that we want to talk about, and we'll talk a little bit about this in the next episode, is that in the beat 'em up style game, right? If we drag in the guide element, where is my guide? This thing. If we pull it in here, this is going to help us see some things. And I've drug it in here, it's called guides, and I'm going to set this sorting layer to be objects so that it's always in front. And so this is going to help us visualize what's going on with our game. Especially in the sense that when our characters move about here, when they go up and go down, we want things to be sorted in a certain way. If we give our guide and put it on top of our Skelly object, let's set it in the same layer as our Skelly. The reason that this gets put right underneath, or makes it look like it's underneath our Skelly, is because of pivot points. And in our game, our beat 'em up style game, we need to make some special adjustments so that when the Skelly object moves in front of Shredder, right now the Skelly is in front of where Shredder's facing, but it's also along the same horizontal plane in relation to each other. It's in the vertical plane also. But our Skelly character should be visually represented in front of Shredder. So what's going on here, right? One last thing. What's going on with Skelly? Why is the pivot point is a weird spot? Let's go to Skelly. Okay. It's there, but why is the pivot point? Oh, okay, cool. Okay, cool. I had it set to center. One thing that we're going to be looking at is going here and making sure that we're looking at mostly at our pivot point. So if we select this button, this goes between the center of our object and the pivot point of our object. And if we did this correctly, then the pivot should be at the foot of our character. That's ideally what we're going to do. And so the point that I was trying to make is that when our Skelly is right here, I need Shredder to be behind the Skelly. And that means the Skelly needs to be rendered on top of Shredder. How do we do this? We're going to go to File, Project Settings, Edit Project Settings, and then go to this little window here. And we're going to expand this to pull it out a little bit. And what we want to be looking at is graphics. And where we're not going to be changing the render pipeline today, but we're going to be changing this transparency and sorting mode. And we're going to change this from default to custom access. And we're going to change the transparency sort access from Z. We're going to eliminate that by setting that to 0 and changing that to Y. And what this does is it tells Unity that we want to give priority to the Y axis, in that when things are closer to us in this direction of this arrow, they need to be rendered after objects that are higher in the Y axis. So you can see that Skelly is has a smaller Y axis value. You can see this in the position here. And so this should be rendered later. If we move it next to Shredder here, both their pivots are really close to each other now. We can see that they're pivot here and pivot here. So when Skelly walks over here, you can see that the renderer, it gets rendered behind Shredder, and that's ideal. So that it looks like our Skelly is walking behind Shredder, like so. This is all about how we set the pivot of our characters. They need to be walking behind, and that the way that we achieve that is by going to how we had said over here, project settings, changing the sorting access to custom access and setting this Y to 1. Cool. I think that's enough for this first episode. We're going to come back and start making our characters move around, and then we're going to add some animations next. Make sure that you like and subscribe. We're going to keep building on this series for beat 'em up style and talk about what the difference is in the difference between a traditional side-scrolly platformy game where you don't see depth and beat 'em up style games. And this guide is going to help us understand what's going on in later episodes. Cool. I'll see you guys later.